You're listening to the Mind Over Finger podcast, episode number 95.
Welcome to the Mind Over Finger podcast, discussions on mindful music making, efficient practice, and building a purposeful career. And now, your host, violinist, teacher, and high-performance coach, Dr. Renee Paul Gauthier.
Hi, everyone. I hope this episode finds you feeling happy. I know that the world continues to offer challenging stories every day, but I hope there are also many blessings in your life right now. Before I introduce today's episode, I want to take a minute to thank GLBM Star 17, who wrote this review of the podcast. As a student and a musician, this is my favorite podcast. I learned so much about practicing, honing my craft, the professional world of the arts, and I come away inspired with each episode. I keep thinking, what else is there to say about practicing? Surely we must have covered it all already. But I still am finding new practical tips and tricks to add to my arsenal. Dr. Gauthier has curated such an astonishing variety of hosts and does a great job asking interesting questions. Thank you so much, GLBM Star 17. It means a lot to me to read that the content of the podcast is bringing you so much value. And now for today's episode, I'm really excited to bring you an extremely knowledgeable, thoughtful, and inspiring musician, Eli Epstein. Acclaimed for his glowing sound and his lyrical freedom, Eli is a sought-after horn player, educator, and conductor. He was second horn of the Cleveland Orchestra from 1987 until 2005 and horn professor at the Cleveland Institute of Music during most of those years. Eli has appeared several times as soloist with the Philadelphia Orchestra and the Cleveland Orchestra, and he's performed recitals and chamber music concerts throughout the world. He left the Cleveland Orchestra in 2005 and moved to Boston to devote more time and energy toward educational and creative endeavors. He serves on the faculties of the New England Conservatory and Boston Conservatory at Berklee. Eli has presented workshops, masterclasses, and recitals at conferences, conservatories, and universities throughout the United States, Canada, and Europe. His students hold positions as chamber musicians and music teachers and have won posts in more than 25 major orchestras in North America. Eli's book, Horn Playing from the Inside Out, A Method for All Brass Musicians, was celebrated as an overwhelmingly stimulating and productive treatise. Its positive influence on the profession will be immediate and lasting. I'm particularly excited about this episode because Eli's philosophy and approach to practicing and music making embody so much of what Mind Over Finger is about. He talks to us about the importance of listening to music in order to ignite our interest, refine our ears, and improve our playing, the process of myelination and how it affects our work, ways to deal with our negative inner voice, ways to express authentic emotions through sounds. He tells us about the magic if, and he shares so much more wisdom. I think you're going to love this conversation. Let's get to the show. Eli Epstein, I'm so happy to have a chance to chat with you today.
Thanks. It's great to be here, Renee.
Eli, first of all, I want to thank my amazing producer, Bella Kelly, for introducing me to your work way back. And I'm so glad that she did because, well, apart from being an incredible musician, your approach to music making resonates with me profoundly. I love your teaching philosophy, which is about focusing on the whole person and developing excellent technique in order to free students to express their feelings and their stories and selves with their audience. Mm-hmm. And I also want to share this quote from Yeats that you have on your website, which encompasses so much of what I strongly believe in is education is not the filling of a pill, but the lighting of a fire. I love this so much, and I can't wait to dive into mindful practicing and music making with you. But before, please tell us about you and your musical journey and how your artistic path has unfolded.
Sure. So I started playing the French horn when I was 7 years old, which is very small for the French horn. I don't advise it for anybody. But my dad was an amateur violinist, and he felt like it was really important for all of the children. I was the youngest of 4 children, still am, for all of us to play an instrument. And so I watched my older siblings choose the flute and the trumpet and the piano. And I used to sit on my father's lap when I was a little kid, and we would listen to all the romantic violin concertos, Brahms and Bruch and Mendelssohn violin concertos. And he would point out, this is the clarinet, this is the bassoon, this is the horn. And when he got to the horn, I was just like, it was sort of like love at first hear. I just loved the sound of the horn. I can't, really explain it. But, even, as part of an accompanying orchestral part, it just really stood out to me. And I said, that's what I want to do when I grow up. And so he found a teacher for me, and I started taking lessons. And, I loved practicing. And, I listened to my dad practicing violin, just sort of sitting on his bed in his bedroom and listening to him practice. And I kind of got a pretty good idea of how to practice, except for, don't be negative with yourself, because he used to call his fingers klutzes and, sort of talk to his fingers. And I remember thinking very consciously to myself later on, I never want to practice like that in this sort of negative way. But I did sort of pick up this whole idea of deconstructing things and taking things apart and doing them slowly and putting them back together and then playing through a whole passage. So I really credit my dad as, he was kind of teaching me without knowing it, how to practice well, except for the negativity part, which we can get to later. But I was taking lessons. I practiced. I listened to a lot of records of, my dad got me the Dennis Brain Mozart horn concertos, which is still my favorite recording of the Mozart horn concertos. Mm-hmm. Was recorded in the 1950s. And I would just sit next to the one speaker. That dates me a little bit. And just with my ear next to the speaker and trying to figure out, how does he do that? How, it just sounded so effortless, so easeful. And it still does. And I still sort of wonder, how did he do that? But now I know a little bit more about how he might have done that. I got really good on horn, and by 10 years old, I was put in this woodwind quintet program at the Settlement Music School in Philadelphia. I grew up in Philadelphia, and Settlement was a fantastic place to go. And there was this teacher there, Shirley Curtis, who was a bassoon player, and she had this incredible program. And it seemed like, there was like the 10-year-old woodwind quintet, the 11-year-old, the 12-year-old, all the way through high school. And it was like an incredible igniter for me. It was like the classic sort of talent hotbed situation where, here I was at 10 years old, this really little kid with a big French horn. And I could see these older kids who were better at their instruments and better at playing chamber music than I was. And, once in a while, if a horn player in an older group would be absent, Shirley would say, Eli, can you fill in the 2 o'clock group? And I would, and then I'd get to play with the really big kids in 9th grade, And it was a way to kind of just keep on igniting me to do better and better and better and practice more and more and more. And some of these kids in the senior quintets would actually win competitions to play with the Philadelphia Orchestra on educational concerts. And it was like, oh, well, that's possible to do, like if I'm in this program. And I ended up winning competitions to play with the Philadelphia Orchestra when I was 11 and 12 and 16. And my group that I was, my woodwind group, won a competition to play Mozart's Sinfonia Concertante, a movement from that with the Philadelphia Orchestra when I was 16. So then we became sort of the big kids, and all the 10-year-old kids could look up to us. So it was this real self-perpetuating system that Shirley had put together. She was a real rigorous teacher. She had been to Curtis and Marlborough. Her husband was in the Philadelphia Orchestra, Sid, and he would coach us once in a while, and he was super rigorous. And we would tape ourselves and listen back, back when it was much harder to tape yourself.
Right. Yes.
And so that we could really hear what other people were hearing. And there was just a whole lot of rigor and a lot of fun. Socially, it was really fun to be in this woodwind program. And, later Shirley had me conduct the woodwind group when she wasn't able to conduct it. And as a freshman in college, I went to the University of Pennsylvania for a year. So I stayed in Philadelphia. And then I went to Eastman because I really decided, my passion really lies with classical music. And my high school teacher said, go to Eastman, study with Vern Reynolds. So I did. And I started playing in the Rochester Philharmonic as a substitute. And that's where I learned the most, I think, in school, was actually the professional experience of David Zinman was the music director at the time, the young David Zinman, who became, music director of Tonhalle Orchestra in Zurich, and, conducted all the great orchestras in the world after that. But as a student, it was a great experience to have this professional situation where, it's like 4 rehearsals, and then you play the concert, then you play the Bruckner Symphony. And I was in the enviable position of like the 2 first horn players not getting along with each other, and they wouldn't assist each other. And so they'd say, Eli, will you assist so-and-so? Will you assist this other person? And I'd be like, yeah. And so that was very exciting to be put in a professional situation. I was like 18 years old and did that. And then after I graduated, there was a second horn opening in the Rochester Philharmonic, and I won the job. And I played there for 7 years and played in a woodwind quintet, no change there, and really loved doing young audience programs. And I was artist in residence in the Rochester City School District. And my favorite audience is third graders because they're the most uninhibited people. And I would play more orchestral excerpts in front of them. And I really wanted to play in a major orchestra, and the Cleveland Orchestra, which was the orchestra I was actually listening to when I was listening to Dennis Brain as a young child, and also as a teenager. I would come home and listen to George Zell and the Cleveland Orchestra play all the Brahms symphonies, and I would listen to it over and over and over again, and I just loved the sound. And I guess I found out later the interpretation was sort of like the greatest, and I thought, I want to play second horn in the Cleveland Orchestra. And lo and behold, an opening came up for second horn, and I auditioned. And Christoph von Dochnani was the music director then, and he chose me to play second horn. And I was there for 18 years, and it was like jumping on a locomotive and going at 100 miles an hour for 18 years. And we recorded the whole orchestral canon, all the Beethoven symphonies and Brahms symphonies and Bruckner and Mahler and 3 of the Ring operas, which was a real highlight with Mr. Dochnani. And then I started getting into some other stuff, some creative stuff with Inside Out concerts and helping audiences find personal relevance in classical music as it's being performed. And I thought to myself, well, I've played in orchestras for 25 years now. I've played the entire repertoire many, many times over. Mm-hmm. And, I think I always had the idea that I would leave the orchestral career to be an educator, because I think I'm an educator at heart. And I sort of had this idea as like a 20-year-old. It's like, I'll get as much experience as I can, and then I'll go and I'll teach it, mm-hmm. Then have that regenerative aspect of sort of teaching what I learned playing in the Cleveland Orchestra with all that rigor, with that really high level. I remember Lynn Harrell coming, he's a famous cello soloist, who I think died recently, and he had played in the Cleveland Orchestra as principal cello with George Zell. And when he came, one of the times he came to play a concerto with Cleveland, he turned around and, he was very warm, and he said, I feel like I went to the Cleveland Orchestra School of Music. Mm. And I was like, that's it. That's what this is. It's like every single day there's this tremendous rigor, and, you're sort of being, even in the rehearsals, held to this real high performing standard. And, Mr. Dochnani, he was an incredible musician with incredible ears, and would always be correcting intonation, and really was quite demanding in a lot of ways every single day. And I was like, in one way it was difficult, and but in another way it was like being in a great music school for 18 years. Mm. And then I took a leave of absence. I moved to Boston because my family lived here, and my parents were still alive. And I thought, well, Boston has a lot of music schools, and it's sort of scary to leave a tenured position in a major orchestra. But I knew some people. I knew the personnel manager of the Boston Symphony, and he was great. He said, Eli, that musicians can't choose where they live, and I laughed. But, he threw a lot of work my way because there were several horn openings, it turned out, when I moved to Boston. So I sort of made this transition into the city and got to know a lot of the musicians in the BSO by going on tour with them and playing a lot with them. And then I was taken on by Boston Conservatory and New England Conservatory, and became the brass chair of NEC Prep. And so it's sort of a full circle kind of thing, because I had such a great experience at the Settlement Music School in Philadelphia. As a kid, I just thought I want to give the same kind of rigor and fun and, a really high level of teaching that I got when I was a kid. I studied with this guy in the Philadelphia Orchestra when I was 13 through 16. It was the best thing that could have happened to me. And I thought, brass players, if they're given really great teaching at a young age, that's like the best thing, because then they develop this great muscle memory and these great habits and sort of sustainable habits. So I really enjoy that aspect of my career, but I also enjoy teaching college students, and I teach several courses, which creative musician, entrepreneurial musicianship, brass pedagogy, the art of practice and performance in the prep for the high school kids. And so I'm very busy.
Thank you so much for sharing this. It's such an incredible story. And I really hear when I hear you talk about the importance of what you are bathed in as a kid when you're talking about watching your father and you're talking first about how you loved practicing and then watching him. And it's like learning by osmosis, absolutely. And then this, how this background forged your path to not only your performance career, but, to the pedagogical activities that you have now and this mindful approach that you have. And you were talking about rigor and fun from being exposed to Shirley Curtis at Settlement. This is so important for us to hear how all of these elements come together in the making of a musician. And you also talk about listening to music so much. And this is so important for all the young musicians out there to know that through listening, they can learn so much.
Yes, absolutely. And, now that we're in this pandemic for a year now, I think one of the biggest pitfalls for music students is feeling isolated and, feeling like, the really fun part is playing with other people, and that the totality of it is much greater than the sum of the parts,
Yes.
And they really miss that kind of fun. And, the whole idea of igniting, it's like we have to keep on igniting. And even though we're in pandemic mode, it's like what I suggest to my students is to listen. Like when I was a kid, there was no YouTube, there was no internet, believe it or not. And now there's like an incredible library of sound, library of incredible live performances on YouTube. I mean, you could never, in a whole lifetime, you couldn't go through all of them. And it's like, wow, you could listen to the legendary, all the great, Jascha Heifetz, Yitzhak Perlman, Huberman. You could listen to, incredible horn CDs that, for me, have to be in some specialty record shop to find if you were lucky. And now you can just hear all this stuff at your fingertips. So what I suggest is, listen to these great groups, listen to great string quartet playing, listen to Kiri Te Kanawa sing Mozart when you're studying Mozart horn concertos, because Mozart was writing in the same style for horn as he was for voice. And so those are the kinds of things I think we have to do on a regular basis to stay ignited, to stay interested, to keep learning.
That's such great advice. Eli, on your website, which is full of great resources, by the way, and I encourage the listeners to check it out, and I'll put a link in the show notes, of course, you talk about radical practicing and how to increase our practice efficiency with creativity. And that's a big topic in my teaching and coaching work, and something we discuss at length in the Music Mastery Experience, which is my online group coaching program. Can you unpack this for us, please? What is radical practicing? What is that to you?
Yeah, it's an interesting title. Well, like I said, I teach a course on brass pedagogy, and in the first class, my first question is, tell me about the worst teachers you ever had and the best teachers you ever had. And it's a great topic with students because I love especially talking about the worst teachers they ever had. And, it's a little bit horrendous to hear about teachers who were, got angry, got violent even, were bored with teaching, didn't have any enthusiasm about it, were just kind of checking in with their time card. And then the really great teachers always had they were rigorous, but fair, and they were fun, and they were incredibly enthusiastic about the subject. And they held students to a high standard, but they were really, sort of understanding and could explain things in very clear and brief ways. And then I asked my students, well, which teacher do you want to be to yourself? Because when we practice, it's like there are two people in the room. And sometimes I do this exercise with students where I say, set up two chairs in the room. And one is your chair, the student's chair, and one is like the wise professor's chair. It's like a Gestalt thing that Joe Bergstaller told me about. And I think it's very effective. And it's like, so the student plays something, and then I say, well, get up and sit in the wise professor's chair and tell your student, in the briefest way and in the clearest way what you think they need to work on and how they need to work on it. And sort of go back and forth that way. I think most students don't think of practicing that way, that they're actually the teacher and the student at the same time.
Such a great point.
Yeah, so when you know that, you start, I think, practicing really mindfully, because you have to listen like a really astute teacher is going to listen to you. And so, being patient, being astute, being very perceptive about things, recording yourself, playing with a metronome, being honest about, did I stay with the metronome? How is my sound? How are other people going to hear my sound? What does my teacher tell me about what I need to do to make a more focused, more penetrating kind of sound? All those things need to kind of be thought about and kind of if discussed, if you will, with yourself. And I think when we think of it that way, then we get really serious about the practicing thing. I think of practicing as, it's a little bit too simplistic to say programming a computer, but are you familiar with the book, The Talent Code?
Yes,
By Daniel
I think I have it
Coyle?
right here.
Very good.
Listeners can't see it, but it's right behind me on the shelf.
Yes, it's right there. I can vouch for that. And so that's one of my favorite books. I think you asked that question. I have, it's a required book for my pedagogy class. And the reason is that Daniel Coyle in the Talent Code talks about this idea of myelin in the brain. And this is getting a lot of play right now. It's not just in the Talent Code. I think Don Green has been talking about it in his videos. And I'm like, yes, Don Green, good. Talk about myelin. So what myelin is, it's a fatty substance in the brain that wraps around neurons that are fired more frequently. And it basically acts as insulation to an electrical wire. And the more insulation you put on those neurons, the faster those neurons fire, and the more automatically those neurons fire. So it really helps to have just that basic information that when we're playing our instrument, no matter what it is, we're really telling our brains and, sort of the motor neurons in our brains, this is what I want to do every single time, So when I play my long tones every day, which I do, I make sure I breathe diaphragmatically. There's myelin wrapping around diaphragmatic deep breathing. I set my embouchure. I sing every single note that I'm playing. So there's all this myelin wrapping around all this healthy stuff. And I repeat things enough so that we get even more myelin wrapping around those things so that those neurons fire more and more automatically. So basically, every day when I'm warming up, it's sort of like I'm reminding my body how to play the horn. Mm-hmm. And you can apply this to any instrument, warming up on any instrument. So it's when you know that information, it's like so important what you're wrapping myelin around, because myelin is completely dispassionate. It doesn't care what you're wrapping it around. If you're wrapping it around missing the same note in Till Eulenspiegel excerpt every time, it'll be like, oh, Eli wants that, and, kind of wrapping around that. So have you ever noticed that when you make a mistake a few times in a row that you're bound to make it again and again and again? It's because of this myelin issue. So we want the myelin to be wrapping around the good stuff, the healthy stuff, what you want it to automatize.
This is great. It helps you. It tries to help you do what it thinks you want, correct?
Mm-hmm.
This is really great. And, I love what you said about this example of having the wise teacher and, the bad teacher chairs. This is self-compassion is at the core of everything that I teach with the deep practice model. And it's so true. I sometimes have students give a name to the negative voice so they can give it an identity and then give it an activity. So, okay, you can go sit in the corner here. I know you're trying to be helpful, but I'm trying to work over here.
No, that's great, because it's like acknowledging that we all have that negative voice inside of us. Mm-hmm. We all have sort of a critical thing going on, but we don't have to sort of amplify that voice.
Yeah.
We can acknowledge it and just say, okay, go sit over there while we do some work. You can have, rest period.
Eli, you've written an incredible book for brass players titled Horn Playing from the Inside Out. And now I'm going to read the description I saw on your website, where you deconstruct brass playing and present specific methods to improve technique, musicianship, practicing, audition taking, managing performance anxiety, and expressing authentic emotion through sound. That sounds like a book I need to read, except I don't play horn, but I could still learn a lot. And I would love for us to talk about that last one, expressing authentic emotion through sound, if that's okay with you. Sure. I know you include elements of the Stanislavski method in your teaching. Mm-hmm. Can you please tell us more about that, this approach of expressing authentic emotion through sound?
Yeah, and I do think that there are parts of the book that a lot of musicians could get stuff out of, like this part. So when I went to Eastman, there were a lot of teachers who would say, just sing it, or, this needs to be more espressivo. And I remember thinking, what do you mean? Expressing what? And nobody ever really got beyond espressivo. And, so I am the kind of person that I'm like trying to figure things out all the time. And I thought, so expressing what? So you take, I don't know, an orchestral excerpt like Tchaikovsky Fifth, second movement, horn solo, la 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 la. And so my teachers would say espressivo, and I'm like, okay.
Thank you.
But so I wanted to figure out a way to, not only for me, but to help my students be able to get beyond that and be able to really get into the weeds of what is expressive about this, what is Tchaikovsky trying to express here. And So before I get into Stanislavski, I want to tell you about the Music for People organization, which is a very cool group of people who it was started by a guy named David Darling, who just passed away, unfortunately, maybe a month ago. But he was a cello player with the Paul Winter Consort. And he and Bonnie Insall started these improvisation workshops to help. It was almost like healing people from bad experiences that they had in music when they were younger. So, for example, there might be people who come to these workshops whose third grade teacher told them that they were tone deaf and couldn't sing on key. And David's point of view was nobody's tone deaf, just lacking in experience. And so after I left the Cleveland Orchestra, one of my first things to do was to go to one of these workshops because I wanted to get off the page. And I didn't know what to expect, but my son had been teaching in this camp, and he heard from one of the other music teachers in this camp that this was a good group of people, Music for People. And so I went, and they had this really interesting concept of that there are two different kinds of energy in music, fire energy and water energy. And within fire energy, there's two energies, yay and hey. And so yay is like Handel's Hallelujah chorus from the Messiah, like hallelujah, this incredible, jubilant feeling. And the hey feeling is more like Holst Mars from the Planets,
Great example.
Really ominous, really threatening, really aggressive. And then there was ooh energy or water energy. And those were the gentler feelings, quietly joyful, like Silent Night, say, or Summertime from Gershwin's Porgy and Bess. And so like melancholy, sad, quietly joyful, tender, gentle, all these sort of softer feelings. And so what I did in my book was I made lists of adjectives for yay energy and hey energy and ooh energy. And I was sort of playing off, there was this fantastic viola teacher from a generation or two ago named Karen Tuttle, who, was very famous in the viola world. And she had lists of adjectives. And I was like, I had a friend who studied with Karen Tuttle, and I said, can I look at her list? And it was along the same lines. And I was like encouraged by that. So I took her list and I added to her list. And so if you look at my list that's in my book under ooh energy, you can take the Tchaikovsky fifth solo and say, okay, what are some good ooh energy words for that? Well, loving, tender, gentle, yearning, wistful, all of these things, because it's romantic music. It's like the complicated human condition that's never just happy or sad. And, it's like happy but tinge of sadness, or sad but a little bit of happiness in it. And so, and then the question Stanislavski might ask is, well, when have you felt that way? When have you felt loving and tender and yearning yet wistful? And, so we delve into our emotional memory. And, that's one of the main methods that Stanislavski used with actors. He was this guy who knew Tchaikovsky, actually, went to dinner with Tchaikovsky in Russia, and his whole thing was like deconstructing how acting works, because he wanted to be a great actor, and he knew that there were just natural actors out there who could do it, who could convince you that they were this other character, who could make you cry with their performances, but they didn't know how they did it really. So he was kind of deconstructing the whole acting thing and wrote these 3 books. And that would be another book that I would recommend, Stanislavski's An Actor Prepares, which is sort of all the basic stuff. So using emotional memory, we can go into our own stories. When have I felt that way? Who do I miss? Like my grandmother, Frida, comes to mind. And, so when I'm playing this Tchaikovsky 5th solo, I can think of my grandmother and, the really close times that we had together, and that I loved her very much and that I miss her very much now. And what happens when we do that is all this, it's what Stanislavski calls activating the subconscious, consciously activating the subconscious. Mm-hmm. And so all these subconscious things start happening, and rather than having the teacher say, well, it'll sound more beautiful if you make this note longer, or if you just delay this diminuendo or whatever. It's more like all these spontaneous things happen with our playing that, in the performance, we just don't know why we're doing it, but, people will come up to you afterwards and say, I got chills when I heard you play that solo. I don't know how you did that. And I might say, well, I don't know how I did that either, because I was using this story in my mind, just like an actor would use their own experience. So that's basically how emotional memory works. And, there's other methods like the magic if. And if you want, I can talk about the magic if a little bit.
Yes, let's hear about that.
The magic if, just IF. You heard it right. So the magic if happens when you don't actually have an experience like I was just describing. And yet you have to be really authentic in your expression. So I was conducting a sectional at NEC on Shostakovich Fifth Symphony. And, this was a piece that Shostakovich wrote when he was very scared of Stalin. And, the old story of having his suitcases packed by the front door just in case the KGB was knocking on the door. And, he was deathly afraid, like most of the time. And yet, the government was sort of, he was unpopular because he was just written the Fourth Symphony, which was, really people would look at it and think it was kind of negative and depressing. And so he was supposed to write a piece that was more nationalistic and more joyful. Well, he sort of was able to write something that on the surface sounded sort of nationalistic and joyful, but under the surface was really quite critical of the government. And so there's, in the first movement, there's this theme. It's like, da, dee, da, 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 da. And, in the brass, it comes back and it's just absolutely brutal and relentless. And so I said to the group, they were very proficient and it was in tune and together and everything like that. But I said, it's missing something. You guys have to sound way more brutal. And for that, we're going to use the magic if. And so you have to imagine being the most ruthless person in the world who just doesn't care about anyone but himself. And you have to imagine, how would this person open the door? How would this person walk into the room? How would this person talk to you? And so let's pretend, I know most of you are not ruthless like that, so let's just pretend we are. And, then when we did that passage again, it was like it made the hair on the back of my neck just stand up on end. And, it was just so powerful. And it's so much fun to conduct because you can do stuff like that and see, the effect of, the magic if times like 35 people. And
Right.
So it's like two different methods that work very well with classical musicians. I think we do those quite readily.
I love this so much, and I think that many of my listeners would find it so useful to have this process in mind when they try to approach musicality next time. And also, I think they should probably get your book. Eli, before I let you go, how about a round of rapid fire questions?
Oh, yes, the lightning round. Okay.
I like to joke that it's never that quick, though.
Okay.
What is a habit that you have that you think contributed to your success?
So I'm very disciplined, and I do my long tones every day, and I'm like the kind of person who likes to be in the weeds. It reminds me of something that I heard that Gail Williams said. Gail played associate principal horn in the Chicago Symphony for a long time. She's a fantastic musician. And something I heard that she said was, you have to fall in love with practicing. You have to fall in love with practicing. And I really like being in the weeds and figuring things out and just adjusting things little bit by little bit and then wrapping myelin around them when I figured it out. And, the whole process of practicing is something that there's something about my personality that I actually do enjoy. And, I love digging. Once the technical stuff is sort of worked out, I love digging into the feelings of things and really looking beyond the notes to, what was the purpose of the composer? What was he or she trying to say here? And, and then look into their past, into their biographies. What was going on in the composer's life when he or she wrote this piece? And how can I use that when I'm thinking about the emotional memory? How can I think of a place in my life that's similar to what was going on in the composer's life? Because I really think there's like this triangle going on between the composer and the performer and the audience. And it's like, if you think of something like Beethoven Moonlight Sonata, piano sonata, it's this really lonely, really dejected, like we're at 3:00 in the morning, and nobody else is awake, and there's the candle on the piano, and here's Beethoven just like crying his eyes out. And, you get to a great pianist, and they know that they have to think of their own experience of feeling, that lonely, that dejected, that, grieving of something. And, when the performer is really tapping into what the composer was going through when he or she wrote the music originally, then the audience picks up on that. And the audience feels understood. It's like, oh, I have felt that way too at 3:00 in the morning. This is part of the human experience. And that's why people like Beethoven have lasted so long. That's why people can still relate to his music, even though it was like 200 years ago or over 200 years ago. He's the same human being that we are now.
Eli, I'm not going to help the process being fast because I want to bring up something that I'm noticing that I think is important. Is you brought up the word rigor many times, but I feel like sometimes people associate the word rigor with rigidity, and they're not the same. And when I hear you talk about rigor, I see it in all of the most beautiful ways. And I think that you illustrate that so well by talking about, discipline. Rigor is more like a purpose and a disciplined purpose, if I can say. And you talk about loving, practicing, dedication, listening to music, and I just love to hear you say this because I want people to understand that one can be rigorous in such a loving and supple and self-compassionate and loving way. Thank you so much for illustrating that so beautifully for us.
Yeah, it's like the hard work comes from caring, from really wanting to do a beautiful job, not for fame and fortune or anything like that, but just because, wow, Schubert wrote this piece and I want to play it as best as I possibly can. So that means that I have to really, practice it in a way that's going to allow me to play it the way I see fit, and, and be able to do that consistently. Not just once in a while, but, you play in the Cleveland Orchestra or the Boston Symphony, and it's like, okay, 4 performances of the Schubert Unfinished Symphony. How do you have that much control? Well, you have to, just keep really working at it. But in this, it is kind of a loving, caring kind of way that you want to do really well because it's the right thing to do.
I love this. What skills do you think, and you've offered many so far, but what skills do you think young musicians studying today should acquire in addition to play their instrument?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a couple of things. I mean, I teach this course on optimal performance at NEC Prep, and I teach it because when I was, I told you I won those competitions to play with the Philadelphia Orchestra, and I remember feeling, nervous about playing in front of this very, famous orchestra, and feeling like, well, there's no one I can really talk to about this. And, I think I did well in those performances, but, there were points when I felt uncomfortable and anxious. And I thought, we really need to talk about this. This is such a taboo subject. And so right now, the NEC Prep is having me do a workshop for the kids in the Youth Philharmonic Orchestra, which is their highest level orchestra. And it's like an elective that they can take. So I have about 30 students in this. And I think the skills that Don Green espouses in his book, Performance Success, are really important to practice. And he will tell you that in his book, this idea of what do we do with the adrenaline response? What are the best ways of dealing with this? I mean, like the best attitude would be that it's normal to have an adrenaline response. And, so my heart is beating faster. How do I slow that down? Well, with deep diaphragmatic breathing. What do I do with my muscle tension and basically, Don is saying, most of the mistakes that we make as musicians, we make because of tension, muscle tension. And I think that's true. It's certainly true in my case. And it's like, if we practice this muscular tension reduction technique, like I did a YouTube video called Relaxation Before Performance, where I have, the one that I do every day, and I have done every day for like 30 years. It's like if you practice those things, then you wrap myelin around the relaxation response. So when you're sitting on the stage of Symphony Hall and you have a solo coming up, you can sit and horn players can do this because we have lots of rests, and go through that whole routine, because when you're practiced at it, you can actually do it quite quickly, and then, kind of be at your best, be at your most, least amount of muscle tension, so that you can perform the way you want to perform. So I would say that those skills are really important for, high school and college students to learn and to feel like they're just as important as playing my scales. That if I spend 10 minutes on this every day, it's a really worthwhile 10 minutes. I would also say improvisation is a really good skill to, just get familiar with, not really jazz improvisation, because there are just as many rules in scales, or more modes and scales in jazz improvisation than in classical. But that really helped me understand music in a whole different way, and really look at, here's this horn solo in a Dvorak symphony. Guess what? Dvorak was improvising on the piano when he wrote that. So you sort of wonder, why did he write it that way? And it's like, because it came to him as an improvisation, just like, Bach and Mozart and Bruckner, we're all incredible improvisers. I think classically trained young musicians sort of don't hear about that. And that I think kind of frees us up to think of, okay, well, these are the notes on the page, but they were all improvised at one point before they were written down.
Right. Oh, thanks for this. Mm-hmm. How about a quick actionable tip that listeners could implement today in their musical lives?
Oh, I thought about the actionable tip and I wrote it down, so I better look at it. Right. Okay. I challenge everyone to write a mission statement. So I teach this course at NEC called the Entrepreneurial Musician. And that's one of the first assignments in the course, to really write a mission statement and answer questions like, what are the talents and skills I've been given? What am I wired to do? What on earth am I here for? How can I make the world a better place? And many other questions like that. And when we go into sort of the deep purpose, into why we're doing what we're doing, what motivates us the most, what really turns us on the most about music and what we're doing, then it can be like this really flexible document for the rest of our lives that we can look at, like every New Year's Eve or something like that, and just see, how am I doing with my mission statement? Like every corporation, every organization, every music school has a mission statement. And, if you go online, you can just type in music school mission statement and find the mission statement. And it helps organizations make decisions about, what's their next move. It helps them know if they're keeping on track. They look at their mission statements and they see, is this part of my mission statement still relevant, or have I changed? And so I think I've used this in my career. I've always loved performing and expressing emotion through music. And so playing in the Cleveland Orchestra was a big part of that. Playing a lot of chamber music in my career has been a big part of that. But it's like at one point in my career, like 15 years ago, I decided, I think I can do this in a different way than playing in an orchestra. Because in an orchestra, all you have is your horn sound, if you're a horn player. And, that is a big part of the sound of the orchestra. But I thought, well, I have a lot that I want to talk about. I have a lot that I want to share, a lot of my inner world, a lot of my inner life, inner musical life and spiritual life that I want to share with people, that I want to share with students, that I want to share with audiences when I do these inside out concerts. And I don't have enough time or bandwidth to do that while I'm still in this major orchestra job, which is, sort of all consuming. And so that's why I left. I wanted to have more time for my creative work and have more time to get into this regenerative aspect of my career. And that's when I had time to complete my book and get into all this other stuff with the MRI horn study, which is a whole other story, but which has profoundly changed how I've taught brass and really helped me write the book that I wanted to write starting a long, long time ago.
Do you want to talk to us a little bit about this book? Because it really sounds to me like what I read about it, that this is going to be a canon for all brass players.
That would be nice. Yeah, I mean, there are lots of good horn books out there and good brass books out there. And, when I was first in the Cleveland Orchestra, I said, we were recording the whole classical symphonic canon, and we'd have to repeat things over and over and over again, because that's what you do when you record anything. And, sort of, I had to figure out, how do you play the trio from Mozart Symphony Number 40 20 times in a row and do it really as well as I could each time. And I had to sort of figure out a lot of stuff about my own horn playing. And so I did. I sort of did all this stuff, all this work and stuff about vowels and where my tongue released from on the teeth or above the teeth, and how I supported, and just all this technical stuff. And then I started teaching at summer festivals, Aspen and Music Academy of the West, and I sort of whipped this stuff on my students. And at CIM also, I taught at Cleveland Institute, and I was like, does this not just work for me? Does it work for other people too? And I found, yes, it works for other people. And I wasn't reading a lot of this stuff in these other books. Some of it, but not in such detail. And I wanted to like put it down on paper, and then after I moved to Boston, I got involved in this sort of scientific study that I could never have even imagined. I did an Inside Out concert in Boston, and this guy came up to me afterwards, and he introduced himself, Peter Iltis, and he was a horn professor, and still is, at Gordon College, which is a small college north of Boston. And he wasn't just a horn professor, but he was a professor of kinesiology, which is the study of movement. And Peter took a sabbatical, and he said, "Can you teach my students?" And I said, "Sure." So we kind of got acquainted that way. And one day he called me up. He said, "Can we have coffee? Because I have a really interesting thing to talk to you about." And he was involved in this study. This is kind of a long story, but I'll try to make it more concise. He was involved in the study about Embouchure Dystonia, which he actually had, which is a task-specific neurological disorder that makes the muscles of the face sort of seize up when you start trying to play the horn or even put a mouthpiece close to your lips. And so he had done some work on this, and he was at a medical conference, and these two German scientists came up to him and said, we have this interesting technology, and we wanted to involve you. And the technology was called this flash MRI technology, which is basically fMRI, only it's done in very rapid succession. So they had the capability of taking 100 MRI pictures per second. So in effect, we had movies of what's going on, like inside the mouth or in the throat or in the lungs. We could actually see movements that had never been seen before. And so here we are having coffee, and Peter said, can you help me design this experiment? And we've got the whole horn section of the Berlin Philharmonic who is on board, and they're willing to volunteer because Göttingen was like a 2-hour train ride from Berlin. And so we created this whole protocol, and and then they started doing this fMRI, making these MRI movies of all of these very high-level horn players. Berlin Philharmonic, Canadian Brass, Marie-Louise Neunecker's really famous German horn soloist, Frank Lloyd, lots of people. Like we had 12 people in this very high level, and I was in that group as well. And I thought to myself, well, I came up with all this technique, and I don't know if it's just me, if it's just sort of idiosyncratically me, and everybody, the first horn player in the Berlin Phil, does it his way, and Sarah Willis does it her way, and we're all doing different things inside our mouths. And what we found was that actually, of all those 12 people, everyone was doing the same movement patterns with their tongues. As they went up the harmonic series, they were in effect making the oral cavitation smaller and smaller and smaller as they went up higher on the harmonic series into the high register. And they were also moving their jaws in this very predictable way as they went into the low register to create a larger oral cavitation. And I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And this points to pedagogy that, if these people, and the average age of all those people was like 50 years old at the time. So they had already been playing professionally for like 30 years. And so it's like, there's the sustainable part. They've been healthy horn players playing at the highest level, not just technically great, but beautiful musicians, artistically fantastic. And so what's really cool about the ebook version, so in the third edition of this book, just print book, I put in a lot of these images, these still images. But the ebook version, which just came out like 3 weeks ago on Apple Books, has these MRI films embedded, and they're like illuminating the text. I'm like describing stuff, and then I'm like, watch this video. Watch this person who's very high level, moving their tongue higher and higher and higher in their mouth. Watch as this person moves their jaw lower and lower as they go to the pedal notes of the horn. And it points to all this body mapping that is amazingly consistent among those 12 people. So I'm very excited to present this because it not only describes it in words and still images, but we have these movies of things that people had not seen before, like 6 years ago. And since I teach a brass pedagogy class, And I know that Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, there's I'm trying to cover a lot of those learning modalities. So it's not just words that you read, but it's images and it's movies that you watch, and you hear the sound as you watch those movies. And there's some recordings that I did and on orchestral excerpts, and I sort of explain how to practice these orchestral excerpts. So for the auditory people, there's something. For the visual people, there's something. For the kinesthetic people, there's other things like finger breathing and lifting chairs to feel what it feels like to have really healthy breath support.
This sounds like such an invaluable resource for everyone because, like you said, body mapping can be so powerful.
Well, it's so important. And when we know exactly what's got to move and how it's got to move, then we tend to be less tense physically. Because, if we, for example, if we're struggling with, how do you play softer? And we think you play softer by squeezing your lips together and creating tension here. Well, that tension gets into the sound. But if you see the MRI film that's showing this elite horn player making a diminuendo and his tongue is rising on the diminuendo and sort of acting as a baffle for the airstream that's coming up from the lungs. And it's like, wait a minute, I don't have to be tense in the middle of my lips anymore. I can just leave them free to vibrate. And that's how you get a beautiful pianissimo sound that's really singing and really clear and focused.
So when are we getting started on the violin version of this?
Well, that's not my field.
Eli Epstein, thank you so much for spending this time with me today and sharing this incredible wisdom, these powerful and important concepts with my listeners.
Oh, it's my great pleasure. It's really fun to talk about this stuff, and thanks so much for having me.
Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this discussion with Eli Epstein. I would love to know what your favorite takeaways from today's conversation were, so get in touch with me. I'm Mind Over Finger on both Instagram and Facebook, and share your thoughts on those topics. As always, I'll have all the information related to this episode in the show notes. You can find them via your podcast app or by visiting mindoverfinger.com, where you can find also more information about mindful and efficient practice, performance preparation, and how to work with me. Speaking of which, the doors are open to enroll for the Music Mastery Experience, my life-changing, highly personalized group coaching program. Over the course of 3 months, I take you through a massive transformation in your music making. We cover tangible and very effective practicing and performance preparation techniques, mindsets that will optimize your playing, and I give you a real process to reach peak performance for those auditions and those concerts that are coming back, and to truly enjoy the entire experience of making music. Here's what Jamie had to say about the Music Mastery Experience. Thank you so much for offering the MME course. It truly was life-changing. It was a challenge many days to face old mindsets and open doors that had been locked and hidden inside of me. But this was just what I needed to do to be able to use the tools and mindsets that you presented in the course. Thank you for guiding me to be a better person and musician. Thank you, Jamie. In the Music Mastery Experience, you can get exactly what you need to create your ideal musical experience, whether it's winning an audition, performing optimally time after time, leveling up your career, or exploring new areas of your playing. And you're going to do all of this while finding meaning and enjoyment in the whole process. So if you have big dreams, big plans, and you're ready for more in your musical life, book a call today at mindoverfinger.com and let's make it happen. So that's it for today. Again, thank you, and à bientôt.